keeping stats and figures on hotels, mainly guest houses as well, and pubs and the like for about 25 years. So been doing it a while. So it started back in, I think, about 1996, something like that, 97. Anyway, we keep statistics for occupancy levels and room nights, and also, of course, as accountants, as good accountants, we keep the profit and loss accounts. So we know how the trends work within the industry, and we've been monitoring those for many years. So we comparing the two can give us just some useful insights, and normalizing those numbers so that we can take out oddities for a particular business. So one of the advantages we've got with where we are with our stats is, so if we have someone who wants to buy a hotel, for example, they need to know what the local numbers are. The banks are very keen to know what that is as well. And our stats, so we've got about 1 million bed nights on our database, and we can use those statistics to help the banks know where things are, because any other organization, they tend to use national numbers, so they're looking at London and then the regions, and the regions finish at Bristol. So our numbers in Devon and Cornwall are quite valuable. We because of my history and where I'm from, a lot of our database is mainly predominantly Cornish based, so that also helps. But so it can provide reassurance for banks. We can provide reassurance to businesses when we're looking at business plans to know how a business might perform through a season. And we might look at a subset of our sample. So we might take 3 or 4 hotels. So if you're buying a hotel that, or another business for that matter, in a particular area, we can look at that particular area. So if I just bring it down to practical examples and real life ones, last week I was asked by a chap who is looking to take on a lease from St Austell Brewery. St Austell had provided him with the numbers that they thought this business could do, and the publican said, well, I think I can do this. He had various other pubs as well, but what do you think is reasonable here? Because I want to go back to the brewery and say, I think I want to make sure the rent I'm paying is the right amount. So we looked at it and we compared it with 4 or 5 other leased houses with St Austell, and he's gone back and he's taken he's going to get a substantial rent reduction in that case, because whilst they were saying you can do this, it wasn't taking a normalized business like that and comparing like with like. It was almost charging him for his own good efforts. So that's an example, a real life one that I used last week on this. And we are just commonly use it, going back to the figures and providing reassurance very often for businesses, and helping them review where we think they should be. So Growth Hope, take note. If you've got anyone who needs that sort of service, let me know. But yeah, just going on to the next slide then, Malcolm, and changing tack a little bit. Really just recapping the sort of mind-boggling position that we found ourselves in almost exactly 2 years ago. Well, I was working from my table tennis table in my old house, and I had a series of very distraught clients phoning me, business going down the tubes. It wasn't a very pleasant place to be. I fell out with my neighbour, had a few choice words when they started drumming in the middle of the day. It was all very unpleasant. I've moved house, but it wasn't a good time, clearly, for businesses. The government came along with an absolute plethora of help for businesses. The main ones, Eat Out to Help Out there, B bills. Everybody took a B bills. It was probably far too easy to get the money. I had the Chamber of Commerce on the phone to me saying, look, we need to get to the banks to make sure they give the money out in the early days on the C-bills, the bigger loan funds. And what I was saying to them is, look, the banks are putting some of their own money in here. They need to have some support, and they were pretty good at getting out the information, or telling businesses the information they wanted. We did about 40 business plans at that time, getting the information to the bank. Latterly, it was probably more than they required, because the banks got used to what they were doing and they didn't really need the same support. But we got money into businesses quite quickly, and that was well needed and required. A lot of the businesses that have the B bills, I'll come back to in a minute, where balance sheets now look for businesses, the B bills are still sitting there, they haven't been touched. But in some cases they obviously have. So we have a lot of businesses now with more debt than they did have, and they need to work out how they're going to run the business going forward, even if it is just the B bills with, well, it can be less than 50,000, but an awful lot of our businesses currently have a loan on them, with £42,000 being the outstanding balance on the B bills right now, and that's going to be a consistent theme over the next 4 or 5 years. Furlough clearly was a massive help for business, any business that employed people. That really kept the wolf from the door in the early stages of this. Our very own Malcolm Bell wasn't really just head of Cornwall tourism at that time. I think he was head of Britain's tourism trade at that time. Did a fantastic job in getting this message out. So thanks, Malcolm, and well-deserved MBE. But the rates relief as well, again, there was just a plethora of different reliefs that were being given there. Rates relief is actually the only one now still in existence, and is continuing until next March, and we'll come back a bit more about that in a moment. And the other points there, the real changer for anyone who was VAT registered, though, was not just the VAT deferral, but obviously the VAT reduction. Got to remember that didn't come along until the middle of 2020. So there was a lot of fairly panic-stricken businesses 2 years ago. It wasn't a nice place to be, really, but people were clubbing together and doing a good job. So just moving on then, and going back to my stats, if you like. So if I can go on to the next, I've got a series of graphs here. In fact, Malcolm, you can probably go on 2 or 3 slides here if you want. It's showing the same thing. So back in 2010, you've got the numbers there, where the element of surprise is lost. This is quite exciting stuff for an accountant. You've just lost it there, Malcolm. But 2010, our stats were quite reliable. By then, we built a decent database. At that stage, we had about 700,000 or 800,000 bed nights in there. But you could see no surprises there. A bell-shaped curve, all centered around August, and everything coming in there. As time went on, and don't forget that was coming out of the last recession, things improved really into 2015. You started seeing the movement upwards, so the bell shape became less bell and more flat, if you like, more pasty shaped. So the key periods there were around the endpoints, if you like. The summer was full, so they were building well around the off-peak seasons. Then 2019, similar, really, again building around the off-peak seasons. 2020, absolute car crash. I remember showing part of this slide before. What I think I didn't show last time, I think that was back in August 2020 where I last showed this slide, was really the massive game change. If you go on one slide there, Malcolm, into the summer period, and we all remember what it was like last summer in Cornwall. I remember going to the Minack on one fairly cloudy evening, and it absolutely being gridlocked. I had to wait in a field for 20 minutes for the traffic to clear. It was incredible, and that was in September. So you see it there. Cornwall's full in the summer last year, but nevertheless, we've lost 3 Easter, or we're into our 3rd Easter here now this year. First time for 3 years that we've had an Easter. I think what that does, and just starting to look forward, and we'll do that a bit more now because all this is very interesting to an accountant, but probably not quite so interesting to you. That I think people are creatures of habit. I think we are likely to see softening for the first part of this year and next year. We're already in this year, of course, but I think there is a softness to activity. I think there's also a bit of a softness to the supply. I think some businesses are staying shut until Easter, and Easter's late. I don't think they necessarily would have done in the past. But I think people have kind of worked out with the furlough that was in and the staff being able to be paid by the government, they've also worked out that if they give them the those periods off, actually the business can be more efficient. So likely to be softer, I think, probably in the first part of 2023 as well. Probably the season will extend out, but probably not as well as the graph we just saw on 2021. But I suspect we might be heading back more to those sort of mid-teens, the 2015s, where the winter periods weren't quite so strong and we were perhaps more reliant on the summer. Hopefully some of that got attracted down last summer. Some of it we didn't want, I know that, but some of it reignited people's passion for the area. Again, sort of new programs coming on yet again about Cornwall. It's really a big advert, really, and Malcolm being asked by Nagamon Chatty to show her his underpants. It does no harm for Cornwall, so sorry. Hopefully, no one minds that comment. It was a comment that Malcolm made earlier. Yeah. So anyway, just looking and seeing what that means to the figures for businesses for the last 12 months or so, and what it means going forward. Turnover actually was down about 35% in 2020. That was despite, and when I say 2020, should just say that's to March 21 with the numbers. So there was roughly half the bed nights were lost in that period, but turnover was only down about 35%. Now, obviously, some of that was to do with the VAT reduction, but like I said earlier, the VAT reduction only came in from the middle of July 2020, and really, we're looking at older data there. So in that period, if you like, the incomes were suppressed for a long period of closure, but actually really reacted well when there was more opening. I think it's fair to say that by the end of 2021, so March 2021, the figures were looking almost like so you had, I'll come on to this again in a minute, you had a lot of borrowing having been taken out, but actually the VAT reduction had saved the businesses a lot of the profits that they would have otherwise lost. Into March, the figures to March 2022, again, we had closure period from up until May, and it's easy to forget that, or maybe not when you're running the businesses. But the VAT reductions came trucking along beyond that and are still in place now, but all of the main season into 2021, right until the end of September, it was at 5%. So these businesses now are largely sitting on some significant cash piles and feeling quite positive about life. I think if we just move on there from that point, if you go on the slide, Malcolm, the position really is that the CJRS covered the wage bills, but there were other costs to account for. So furlough was great to start with. It was hugely costly for the government, so it could only be continued for a certain amount of time. It was the VAT reduction, though, that came along. And remember, this was a national scheme, so it was to help all the businesses along the M4 corridor, all around Heathrow. The VAT actually didn't help them very much because they just weren't getting the trade in the first place. But Cornwall was really benefiting from that. And we've seen some extraordinary numbers coming through in terms of the cash that businesses are now sitting on as spare cash. Nevertheless, they are still sitting on the debt levels that they took historically. But if you think of it like 2020, the debts that they had really were compensated for by the VAT saving, and then in 2021 the VAT saving largely improved their cash balances. I think it's fairly safe to say that most businesses within the area, whilst it was hugely disruptive, have improved their balance sheets at this point in time. The rates relief is still continuing at 50%. That equates to about 2.5% of turnover. So again, it's not a small number, and it's going to help businesses again through what should hopefully be a decent summer. But we'll come on to that again in a minute. I think the problem we've got now, obviously, is the return of COVID and how that's going to impact. So 2.5% of turnover saved as the only saving that these businesses are now getting probably is going to be a tough call, but they are sitting on the cash. So on to the next slide, Malcolm. So occupancy was up in the summer periods, as we know. As I've just shown on the previous slides, July 21 to December 21, occupancy versus 2019 were up. I've got nearly 10% there. In August to October 2020, they are up on the same period as 7.7%. So you can see the growth for the 2021 actually extended over a longer period, but actually it was already there and being achieved to lesser or greater extent in 2020. We hear a lot in the press about, things are up 15, traffic on the A30 is up 15-20% or whatever. Historically you used to get these Western morning news articles. Gosh, it's up, it's down, it's left, it's right. With our database, if things moved by more than 2%, it was significant. It was worth reporting. Most of the time, it didn't move much more than that. To put that into perspective, the last time we've seen growth of anything like these sorts of levels in terms of occupancies, Eden Project opened, so it was around 99, 2000, 2001, somewhere around there. And we haven't seen anything like that since. There was a bit of growth, it's true, as you saw in the last slides, actually, around 2010, they got up to sort of 5 or 6% growths, with drops in intervening periods and more significant drops prior to that. But it's certainly never more than 10%. 2% significant. So these number changes that we were seeing last year and the year before were massive. What that did to the profitability of these businesses, and to a greater or lesser extent, this was the VAT savings that they had. Profitability historically is about 13.8% on our normalized profitability for a standard hotel. Now, obviously, a lot of you don't run hotels, but if you take that as the money that these businesses are taking, because then these number of people are in Cornwall, that rose to 19.8% in 2020. I haven't yet got the figures for 2021, but I suspect it's going to be higher than that. So a sea change in the profitability of these businesses over that period. I'm not, clearly that isn't sustainable. A lot of that was to do with VAT. So we're heading back to less than 13.8%, I suspect, and we'll come on to the reasons for that in a minute. But the revenue per occupant, again, that was up, again, partially driven by the VAT, but also it's worth just mentioning the mix of the sales with some of these businesses. So if a hotel had a spa, clearly it didn't have any spa income or very little spa income. There is a general shift to more accommodation driven businesses, and a move away from the spa-like products, not obviously not in their entirety, but as a general shift, hotels are tending to want to put, if they're looking for an extension, they're tending to put accommodation in rather than a spa, for example. Now, I think it's a safer bet right now for sure, but that has a bearing on what that profit mix looks like, and inevitably some of the efficiency savings that can be made through accommodation rather than having a spa that you spend 80% of your earnings on the staff, is going to have a big bearing on your profitability. So just going on, I mentioned earlier about the balance sheet differences and changes, and we'll move on a bit more quickly here, because the really, I think I've probably already covered this, that the B bills and the C bills came in. These are debts that banks wouldn't have ordinarily given. So banks traditionally are looking at, you know, maybe 60% loan to value and then serviceability on top. So you'd be lucky to get 60%. These push this very often above that. So yeah, banks were forced in many ways to give more cash to these businesses. These businesses haven't repaid a lot of this, so you've got big cash balances, bigger debts, and they will need to be serviced going forward. Into 2022, 2021, 22, the debt is coming down to some extent. Some of it is being paid off, but a lot of it is still, people are still sitting on cash balances wondering what they can do with that. The increases in summer occupancies in 2021 certainly offset the Easter, or the lack of Easter, in 2021 as well. So yeah, anyway, the rates reductions are still significant going forward. So yeah, we're expecting those balance sheets, they've just got more on them. There's more debt and there's more cash. The next slide here is then moving into staffing and issues about that. I think yeah, recruitment is clearly a hot topic. We've got, yeah, businesses now are commonly, you know, calling me saying, what can they do? You know, bonus schemes, accommodation costs, if you can get a mortgage, if you can find a house, aren't actually much different to 20 years ago, and I can prove that because you look at any of the indices, but you look at a newly qualified accountant now can afford much the same house as they could 20 years ago. It's just that the mix of interest and capital has changed significantly. It's not going to take much for that shift to change drastically if interest rates go up, though. But that's beside the point. People can't find the houses to start with. If you just go on to the next slide, the accommodation, yeah, it is a tricky exercise. If you can find accommodation for your staff, you've got to trade off between the benefit in kind rules and the limitations on what you can take from a staff member through minimum wage rules. They're talking about removing the minimum wage rules. What they should actually be doing is removing or relaxing the benefit in kind rules. But there is a mismatch here. We've got large organisations that are buying property up for their staff if they can find them. I think I've talked to St Austell, hopefully they won't mind me saying, they bought more houses last year than they did pubs. They now own 260 houses just to house their staff. Yeah, this is big business all of its own, never mind about the fact they've got to brew beer as well. So just the retention issue is going to be key. There's some great retention of staff in a lot of restaurants, in a lot of pubs, in a lot of hotels. You know, hoteliers, publicans, restaurateurs paying for medical treatment for their staff, making sure they can get back early. You know, it is the caring of the staff is going to be vital. You look at the shortage of, you take St Agnes as an example. St Agnes, as of this morning, there is not a single house to rent in St Agnes, and it's a town or a village of 7,500 people. And there's numerous tourism businesses that need accommodation. There has to be something that can be done about that, and that's probably around the Airbnb thing, tax it, you know, putting back in, reinstating the business rates for all furnished holiday lets. It will keep the top tier, but it will remove some of those people that don't, or should that stock should really fall back into the housing market. And it would only take 2 or 3 of these properties to fall back into St Agnes's supply lines, and it would make a massive difference to the likes of, you know, let's talk in terms of reality, Driftwood Spas. You know, they could rent a house, they could put the staff in, problem solved. So yeah, anyway, sorry, I'll get off my high horse and move on swiftly. Everybody knows about inflation. Inflation's here. We've had the inflation on the revenue last year. Hopefully we can maintain some of that, but it's unlikely you're going to be able to raise your rates much from last year. The heat and light, it's going to largely be deferred if you've got a fixed rate, but clearly up to 50%. 8% as a minimum is going to be the cost increases there. cost of repairs, maintenance, 30-40% increases in material costs. These are significant costs, and unfortunately the costs that relate to all of the businesses that we're dealing with here, they're all highly capitalized businesses. They need money spending on them, and they're going to be big costs. So going back to that margin of 13.8%, that's why I'm saying it's going to be lower than that. Plus the fact you doubled down on national insurance rates that Rishi's still ploughing on with, and your staff are 1.25% worse off as of April. So some bad news there really, and there's nothing we can do about it. So it just, hopefully those cash piles will last out for the summer, and hopefully we can maintain the sort of perfect storm that is the inflation. Just going on to the budgeting, I can't remember a period where using these stats and these figures has been as hard as it is. You saw those graphs going wiggly squiggly. I've never had to deal with that before. We are just in a period of higher risk. It's going to be harder to get debt from banks, because banks are just going to go, forget it, I'm not interested. You might be shut next week if COVID picks up anymore. It's just going to become very, very difficult. That minimum wage increases are, it's more of a lack of supply rather than the minimum wage increases that are coming through now that are going to cause those issues. But the savings that can probably be made from some of the rates reductions, but also moving more to a less labor intensive type of business should be considered. So reasons to be positive, I'll be positive from it. I'm normally quite positive. It's a shame I've got to go do this, but yeah, occupancies, if we can maintain those occupancies from 2020, 2021, that's going to be massive benefit for us over the summer. I don't doubt that it's going to be soft into the early part of 2023, and probably some of this is going to fall away because the cost of living increases, but hopefully that can be maintained. The mixture, again, just coming back to that mixture of income, that again is a useful tool that we'll be able to maximize. Looking at receptions that don't have a receptionist anymore, they're all small wins, but it's all about the little wins that I think we can make here. And of course the rates continuing, it's 2.5% of your turnover. And the negative, double-digit inflation, staff shortages. If the summer isn't as strong, that's going to have a dramatic impact. Interest rates, 0.5%. Doesn't sound a lot, but 0.5% on £1 million, £5,000 you're not going to see again. Budgeting more difficult, and it's just a riskier environment. So I will just touch on, I've run out of time, but I know George is going to be quicker than me in a minute, so I'm going to take some of her time. So super deductions, companies only, but new kit that you're buying at the moment, you're effectively getting a reduction to the tune of about 25% against your tax. You can go into more detail if anyone wants to on that, but the corporation tax is going up from 2023. Personal tax rates, we've all seen the kicker of the on the last slide on the NIC, so that's where you're going to be hit, and also the dividend tax as well. So tax is just generally going up. So on the paper today, this current government, I think, put taxes up by about 3% on top of Cameron's government of about 2%. So much for tax cutting Tories. Having said that, you all saw the slide earlier of all the handouts that have been given over the last few months. So yeah, careful analysis of the capital expenditure. That's something that's a bit different. Where you've bought an asset, just looking at the historic capital expenditure and the capital allowances that might be available there might be worth looking at. Just worth bearing in mind, if any of you bought furnished holiday let, for example, there could be something in it in the plumbing and heating that you've got in the building. I don't expect any claims have been made on that in the past. Looking at it at 25%, that's 25% saving. So that's that. What to be aware of into 2022, none of this is anything that you can't already read in the press, but consumer habits are going to be subdued. Undoubtedly, we've got a recession coming. You can't have inflation, low wage increases and higher taxes without having a recession. It may be short-lived, but there is a recession coming. Technology, if we can embrace some of that, clearly it's limited, but if you can remove the odd receptionist from your staff cost, albeit that you might just be working as a couple in a business, but if you can remove some of those labor intensive activities, that that should be helpful. But yeah, it's not great, and we need to make sure we preserve those tax those cash piles, if assuming we've got them. Just a word on Ukraine. The PKF Hospitality, which PKF, we're an associate firm of PKF, but PKF Hospitality is also an associate firm of PKF. Their main man there, Michael Widnam, has a number of relations in Ukraine, so I think it was particularly keen on this. But if we have any desire to help, I think this was put up before the government announced their plans for housing people. I though would also like to lead. I've got a colleague at PKF Hotels on if we want to think about jobs for the refugees. And I know one of the ministers was badly burned on making these comments, and fairly flippant comments about they should apply for fruit picker licenses. But if the refugees are going to be here for a long time, they are going to have something to do. And I wouldn't mind putting some names on a letter to a local MP or maybe a group of MPs to try and encourage that, because it goes back to the slides earlier about staffing and the problems that we've had there. So anyway, enough from me. Sorry, I've waffled on too long. Thanks, Mel.
That's fine. And yeah, pick up a few things. I think it is, as you say, it's an interesting time to be trying to budget and do things, and picking up on a couple of other things like the Airbnb. We had a meeting with the oversight committee of the council yesterday about compulsory registration of all accommodation. Which I think would then also have an impact on some people dropping out of that, because the rules do apply. And finally, I think it's interesting you said about Ukraine. I'm pushing, and it looks as though the council are going to put together a group to how do we get effective on the Ukrainian refugees. Cornwall's had an awful lot of accommodation offered. There's a lot of people to come. They are very proud people that will want to do, and I think in the right sensitivity, in the right way, there is a way of helping the refugees through employment, not helping us with them. And it is something we're pushing for. So I might come back to you on that, Tom,